This story is titled, He Hired a Wife, She Delivered a Miracle. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain poured down like a gray curtain over the city, tapping softly against the tall windows of Cole Pharmaceuticals. Inside the corner office, Ethan Cole stood alone beneath the cold glow of the city lights. A man who built an empire before turning 35, yet tonight, his reflection looked more like that of a ghost. On his desk lay two things: a custody letter for his late brother's child and a contract with a single word on the first page: marriage. Ethan's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he rehearsed what he would say. "It is not about love," he muttered under his breath. "It is about survival." When the door opened, Lila Hart stepped inside. She looked small beneath the weight of the city, her nurse's uniform replaced by a plain sweater, her hair tied back neatly. Her eyes showed exhaustion, but also quiet strength, the kind that comes from losing almost everything and still standing. Ethan gestured for her to sit. "Miss Hart," he began, his tone formal, almost rehearsed. "I will be direct. I need a wife. Not forever, just for appearances. There will be a contract, payment, and complete discretion." Lila blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "A wife," she repeated, her voice unsteady. "You mean pretend?" Ethan nodded once. "Exactly. Pretend. I am facing a custody battle over my nephew, Noah. The court expects a stable family environment. My company expects an image of stability. You will be compensated generously enough to pay your mother's medical bills and the debts you mentioned in your interview." Lila swallowed hard. She had applied for a job as a home nurse, not a stand-in wife. For a moment, the sound of rain filled the silence between them. Her thoughts raced: rent due in 2 weeks, hospital invoices piling up, eviction notice taped to her door. Ethan pushed the contract toward her. "You will have housing, protection, and privacy. The only condition: this remains a professional arrangement. No emotions. No expectations." He leaned back, eyes calm but distant, as if already regretting his own words. "Do we understand each other?" Lila picked up the pen, her fingers trembling. "So, this is just business?" she asked quietly. Ethan met her gaze, his voice low. "Only business." Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. She signed her name. The ink bled slightly on the paper, like a promise she could not take back. When she looked up again, Ethan had already turned toward the window, his profile outlined by lightning. Somewhere deep down, both of them felt a first crack in a deal that was never meant to feel like love. And as the storm raged outside, a story began that would change them forever. The next morning, Lila woke up in a new apartment that did not feel like hers. Everything was too quiet, too perfect. A vase of white lilies stood on the kitchen counter with a note that read, "Your schedule begins at 9. It was signed, E. Cole. She touched the paper and felt the weight of her decision settle in. 3 months of pretending to be someone's wife, in exchange for the chance to save her mother. She opened the closet and saw rows of tailored dresses, shoes that looked untouched, and a small jewelry box with a simple band of gold. She whispered to herself, "You signed up for this. Do not fall apart now." At precisely 9, a car arrived to take her to the Cole estate. The mansion loomed like a museum, elegant and cold. When the door opened, Ethan was already waiting, wearing a dark suit and an unreadable expression. "You look presentable," he said quietly. "Our attorney will walk you through the details before the press meeting." Lila nodded, clutching her handbag as if it were a lifeline. The lawyer spoke quickly about legal coverage, financial terms, and confidentiality. It sounded like a business merger, not a marriage. Then Ethan turned to her and said, "We will keep separate rooms. Appearances in public are part of the contract. You will need to attend the company gala next week." Lila tried to hide her discomfort. "Do I need to memorize anything?" she asked. Ethan's eyes softened slightly. "Just remember to smile, Mrs. Cole." The words hit her harder than she expected. Later, a stylist arrived with racks of gowns, fabrics whispering as they hung on silver bars. Makeup artists, photographers, assistants, people who barely looked at her face, yet reshaped her into a woman who belonged in his world. By sunset, she stood before the mirror, unrecognizable. Her reflection was polished, flawless, but her eyes carried the same flicker of uncertainty. Ethan appeared at the door. For the first time, his expression faltered. "You clean up well," he said, almost surprised. She smiled faintly. "I am trained to follow instructions." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The next few days passed in a blur of photo sessions, scripted interviews, and formal dinners. Lila learned how to speak in half-truths, how to smile without showing too much, how to pretend she was not counting the days. One evening, during a board meeting, she sat silently beside Ethan as flashbulbs burst in their faces. She felt the weight of every stare, every whispered judgment. Afterward, as the guests left, Ethan approached her. "You handled that well," he said. "They believe you." "Do you?" she asked softly. For a moment, his mask slipped. "I want to." The honesty in his voice startled her. It was gone in an instant as he turned to leave. When Lila returned to her room that night, she found a small envelope on the vanity. Inside was a handwritten note, "Thank you for not running." It was unsigned, but she knew who it was from. She folded the paper carefully, placing it in her drawer as if it were something sacred. Outside her window, the city lights flickered like distant stars. Somewhere in the same house, Ethan stood by his window too, staring at the same night sky. Neither of them knew it yet, but something had already begun to chaunhey, a quiet crack in the wall between contract and connection. And as the days moved forward, what started as an agreement would begin to feel dangerously real. By the third week, the rhythm of their arrangement had settled into something that felt almost ordinary. Ethan left early every morning, his driver waiting at the door exactly at 7. Lila spent her days at the estate, pretending to live a life that was not hers. She learned the staff's names, watered the roses in the courtyard, and kept to herself. Yet, each evening, at precisely 8 o'clock, they shared dinner at the long mahogany table that could seat 20 but held only 2. The silence was heavy at first, broken only by the clink of silverware and the quiet hum of the city outside. One night, Lila finally spoke. "Do you always eat alone?" she asked. Ethan looked up, surprised by the question. "Solitude is underrated," he said. "At least it does not lie." She smiled faintly. "Neither does hunger." His brows lifted, but for the first time, he laughed, a low, quiet sound that seemed to startle even him. From that night on, something small began to shift. Their conversations stretched longer, sometimes about the company, sometimes about nothing at all. He started asking her opinions, not as a formality, but as if he genuinely cared. When she mentioned her mother's recovery, he listened without checking his watch. One afternoon, Lila wandered into the music room and found a piano covered in dust. She sat down and played softly, unsure if she remembered the notes. The melody floated through the hall, gentle and imperfect. Ethan appeared at the doorway, drawn by the sound. "I did not know you played," he said quietly. "I used to. Before everything became about survival." He stood beside her, his reflection in the polished wood merging with hers. "Maybe it is time you remember how to live," he said, almost to himself. The next day, he brought her a new sheet of music. "Play this tonight," he said. "Consider it practice for the gala." She laughed. "Practice for pretending to be your perfect wife?" His answer was soft. "No. Practice for being seen." The gala arrived sooner than expected. The grand ballroom glittered with chandeliers and conversations that dripped with wealth. Ethan's hand rested lightly on her back as cameras flashed around them. "Smile, Mrs. Cole," he whispered. She did, but it was not an act this time. Reporters swarmed, executives raised glasses, and for a brief moment, she forgot the contract. Then came the test. A woman in a sequined gown leaned close, voice dripping with disdain. "So, you are the nurse who married into fortune. How convenient." The words cut, but Lila steadied her breath. "Convenient, yes," she replied, smiling. "It is convenient to love someone who reminds you of what honesty looks like." The room went still. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his eyes held pride. Later, as they escaped to the balcony, he turned to her. "You handled that better than I did," he said. The city lights shimmered below them like liquid gold. "I was not pretending," she said quietly. For the first time, he reached for her hand, hesitant but certain. "Neither was I," he admitted. They stood there in silence, the contract between them suddenly feeling fragile. Back inside, the music swelled, but out on that balcony, the air was different, thinner, softer, alive. When they returned home, Ethan walked her to her door. "Good night, Mrs. Cole," he said, voice low. She looked at him for a long moment. "Good night, Mr. Cole." When the door closed between them, neither could sleep. In separate rooms, under the same roof, both were haunted by the same realization: the lines they had drawn were already starting to blur. The morning after the gala, the Cole estate felt strangely alive. The household staff whispered about how radiant Mrs. Cole had looked, how she had handled the press with grace that even seasoned politicians could not match. Lila tried to ignore the talk as she poured her coffee, but when she caught her reflection in the silver pot, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. She had survived her first major test in his world, but something deeper had shifted. When Ethan entered the room, he looked different, too, less guarded, more human. "You impressed them," he said, setting down his briefcase. "You impressed me." She smiled. "I thought I was only supposed to fulfill a contract." He hesitated before replying, "Some contracts change the terms themselves." The day unfolded quietly until late afternoon, when Ethan invited her to join him on a site visit for one of the company's charity programs. The car ride was silent at first, city lights sliding past the tinted windows. Then Ethan said softly, "My brother started this foundation. After his accident, it became my duty to continue it." His tone carried a weight Lila had never heard before. At the community clinic, children ran through the halls, volunteers sorted supplies, and an elderly woman hugged Ethan as if he were family. Lila watched him, this man who had once seemed made of stone, kneel to tie a child's shoelace without hesitation. The sight disarmed her completely. Later, as they walked through the courtyard, she said, "You are not who people think you are." He looked at her, surprised. "And who am I, Mrs. Cole?" She smiled gently. "A man who still remembers how to care." He did not answer, but the look in his eyes told her she was right. That night, back at the mansion, the air between them was different. Ethan poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. "To survival," he said. She raised her glass. "To pretending." Their glasses touched, and for a moment, the pretense felt dangerously real. Then he said quietly, "You should not have to pretend all the time." She met his gaze, the flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Later that evening, Lila walked through the quiet halls and found the door to Ethan's late brother's study slightly open. Inside, framed photos of Noah as a baby lined the shelves. On the desk was a birthday card drawn in crayon, the words crooked and bright, "For Uncle Ethan." She smiled sadly. When Ethan found her there, he did not scold her. Instead, he leaned against the doorway and said, "He called me his hero once. I failed him." Lila shook her head. "You did not fail him. You kept his promise alive." The silence stretched, filled only by the faint ticking of the clock. "Thank you," Ethan whispered. It was the first time he had said those words since she met him. That night, the storm returned, rain pattering softly against the glass. Lila could not sleep. She stepped onto the balcony, her robe fluttering in the wind. A moment later, Ethan appeared beside her, his hair damp, his shirt sleeves rolled up. Neither spoke. The city lights below shimmered like 1,000 tiny confessions. Finally, Ethan said, "When I asked you to marry me, it was to save my company. But somewhere along the way, you saved something else." "What is that?" she asked. His answer was barely a whisper. "Me." They stood in silence, hearts beating faster than the rain around them. No vows, no music, no witnesses, just two people caught between duty and desire, realizing that the line separating business from love had quietly vanished. The contract that once bound them now felt like the only fragile thread holding them together. The following week began with sunlight and ended with chaos. Ethan's company was preparing for its quarterly board meeting, the first since the public debut of his marriage. Every magazine headline now read, "The reclusive CEO finds his perfect partner." Investors were pleased, employees admired him, and for the first time in months, the company's stock climbed steadily. Yet inside the mansion, Ethan could not shake a quiet unease. That morning, as he adjusted his tie, Lila appeared at the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You forgot breakfast," she said. He looked up, surprised. "You did not have to." "Neither did you, but you still brought my mother's medicine last week," she replied with a soft smile. He accepted the cup and murmured, "Thank you." They shared a rare silence that did not feel awkward. But peace was fragile in their world. Later that day, while Ethan was in his office, Lila overheard 2 staff members whispering near the stairwell. "Did you hear? Someone leaked the marriage contract," one said. The other gasped. "It was supposed to be confidential." Lila's pulse raced. She went straight to Ethan's study, where he was reviewing documents. "Ethan, someone knows," she said, breathless. He looked up sharply. "Knows what?" "About us. The contract. People are talking." Ethan's expression darkened. "That is impossible. Only 2 people besides us have seen it, me lawyer and my assistant." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. A headline flashed on the screen, "Fake marriage scandal rocks Cole Pharmaceuticals." Lila watched his face go pale as he scrolled through the article. It detailed every clause, every condition, painting her as an opportunist and him as a manipulator. "Who would do this?" she whispered. Ethan's voice hardened. "Someone who wants this company destroyed." Within hours, reporters gathered outside the gates. Cameras flashed, microphones shouted questions, and the air turned poisonous. Ethan's board demanded an emergency meeting. Inside the mansion, Lila stood alone in the living room as chaos brewed around her. The staff avoided her eyes. When Ethan finally returned that night, his suit was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. "They want me to step down," he said bitterly. "They say the scandal tarnished our image." Lila stepped closer. "Tell them the truth. Tell them I am not just a name on paper." "It will not matter," he said quietly. "They already made up their minds." His shoulders sagged, the weight of years pressing down on him. "Maybe it would be better if you left for a while," he added after a long pause. The words hit her like a slap. "You want me to go?" "I am trying to protect you," he said. "From what?" "From the world or from yourself?" she demanded. His silence was her answer. Tears stung her eyes, but she held her ground. "You told me not to fall in love. I did not listen. That is my mistake, not yours." She walked past him, her footsteps echoing down the marble hall. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the door long after it closed. Outside, the reporters still shouted his name, but he heard only the sound of her fading footsteps. That night, Lila packed her few belongings, the plain sweater she had worn the day they met, the note he had once left on her vanity, and the simple gold band she had never taken off. When she stepped out into the rain, no cameras followed her. The storm swallowed her figure as the mansion lights flickered behind her. Inside, Ethan sank into the empty dining room chair, the untouched dinner growing cold on the table. For the first time in years, he felt the one thing he had built his life to avoid: loneliness. And as thunder rolled in the distance, he whispered into the silence, "I hired a wife and lost the only woman who ever made me feel alive." Days turned into weeks, and the mansion that once hummed with activity now felt hollow. Ethan buried himself in meetings, crisis management, and endless apologies to shareholders. Yet, every time he walked past her empty room, something inside him fractured a little more. Lila had vanished quietly, leaving behind no forwarding address, only the faint scent of lilies in the hallway. The tabloids eventually moved on, but the damage to his heart remained. Late one night, Ethan sat alone in his office, a half-empty glass of whiskey beside him, when his assistant, Daniel, entered hesitantly. "Sir," he began, "I thought you should see this." He placed a folder on the desk. Inside were bank transfers and a mailsproof that Daniel himself had leaked the contract to a rival company. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Why?" he demanded. Daniel stammered, "They offered me a promotion. I did not think it would ruin everything. I am sorry." The words barely registered. Ethan stood, every ounce of composure draining from his face. "Get out," he said coldly, "and do not come back." When the door slammed shut, Ethan sank back into his chair, the silence deafening. He picked up his phone and dialed Lila's number again, knowing it would go straight to voicemail. "Lila, it was not you." "It was never you," he said softly. "Please come home." But she did not answer. Across town, Lila was living in a small apartment above a florist shop. She spent her days volunteering at a community clinic, using the experience she once had as a nurse to help those who could not afford treatment. The people were kind, the work fulfilling, but every night, when she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan standing in the rain. She tried to convince herself that walking away was the right choice, yet her heart disagreed. One evening, while closing the clinic, she overheard two women talking near the reception desk. "Did you hear? Cole Pharmaceuticals is losing its biggest contract," one said. "Apparently, their CEO might resign." Lila froze. The thought of Ethan losing everything because of a lie twisted her stomach. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and left. The next morning, she arrived at the company headquarters. The security guard recognized her instantly but hesitated. "Mrs. Cole?" he asked softly. "Not anymore," she said, her voice trembling. Inside the building, chaos reigned. Employees whispered, phones rang, and tension filled the air. When Lila stepped into the boardroom, every head turned. Ethan was at the far end of the table, mid-sentence, but when he saw her, his words died. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lila said clearly, "If anyone here still doubts the integrity of your CEO, you should know the truth. The leak came from within. Ethan Cole never manipulated anyone. He protected me, even when it cost him everything." Murmurs rippled through the room. Ethan's eyes glistened, though his voice remained steady. "Lila, you do not have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "You gave me dignity when I had none. It is time I returned it." The board members exchanged looks, the tide shifting visibly. After the meeting, when the room emptied, Ethan walked toward her slowly, as if afraid she might disappear again. "You should not have come," he said, his tone torn between gratitude and fear. "I had to," she whispered. "I could not let them destroy the man who taught me what real strength looks like." For the first time in months, he smelled a small, broken thing that reached his eyes. "I missed you," he admitted. Lila stepped closer. "Then stop missing me." The distance between them vanished. No audience, no cameras, no contract, just two people who had finally stopped pretending. As they stood there, the weight of everything they had endured melted away. The world outside still buzzed with chaos, but in that quiet moment, something fragile yet unbreakable began again. For a brief moment, it seemed as if everything would finally fall back into place. The scandal faded, the board restored its trust, and Cole Pharmaceuticals slowly regained its footing. Lila resumed her work at the clinic, but this time with Ethan's full support. Every evening, he waited outside to walk her home, their quiet conversations filling the space where walls once stood. Yet peace rarely lasts when the world still holds grudges. One gray afternoon, Ethan received a call from his legal department. His former assistant, Daniel, had leaked one more document, a private letter Ethan had written to Lila during their separation. The tabloids twisted its meaning into a new headline: CEO's affair confession exposes secret deal. Within hours, reporters swarmed again, spinning the same narrative that had nearly destroyed them before. Ethan slammed his phone down, anger pulsing in his veins. "It never ends," he muttered. Lila placed a hand on his arm. "Then let us end it our way." That night, she appeared on a live broadcast beside him. Cameras flashed as she spoke directly into the microphone. "My name is Lila Cole. Months ago, I agreed to a contract marriage with Ethan Cole. It began as business. But what I found was not wealth or fame. I found a man who values kindness over power and integrity over image. I am proud to be his wife, not because of his name, but because of his heart." The room fell silent. Ethan took her hand. "And I am proud to love the woman who taught me what real courage looks like." The statement spread across social media, and for the first time, the world saw them not as a scandal, but as two people who had survived it. Still, behind the smiles and applause, there remained a shadow. Neither of them had noticed one final move from the man who betrayed them. Late that night, a sudden crash echoed through Ethan's office. The window had been shattered, papers scattered across the floor. Security footage revealed Daniel breaking in, attempting to destroy evidence that linked him to corporate espionage. When the police arrived, Ethan stood silently, watching as the man was taken away. "He almost ruined us," one officer said. Ethan shook his head. "He only reminded me how much we had to lose." Lila stepped beside him, her hand finding his. "And how much we still have to protect." Outside, flashing lights painted the night red and blue, but inside, there was only calm. The war was over, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt free. As dawn broke, he looked at Lila and said quietly, "I built an empire from logic, but it took chaos to teach me love." She smiled, leaning into him. "Then let us rebuild it with truth this time." And as the first light touched the horizon, their story, once written in contract and compromise, began again in something stronger: faith. The weeks that followed brought a calm neither of them had known before. The media storm finally quieted, investors returned, and the company began rebuilding its reputation from the ground up. Yet for Ethan and Lila, the change that mattered most was not in headlines or profits, but in the way they began to live. The walls between them had vanished completely. There were no more separate rooms, no more scripted appearances. They shared breakfast in the same kitchen, laughed over burnt toast, and talked late into the night about everything they had once been afraid to say. Still, the shadow of the past lingered. One evening, while they reviewed documents for the new charity division, Ethan found the original contract, the one that had started it all. The papers were slightly yellowed, the ink faded, but his signature was still bold across the bottom. He stared at it for a long moment before saying quietly, "This piece of paper almost destroyed us." Lila looked up from her seat across the desk. "No," she said gently. "It gave us a chance to find out who we really are." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then it is time to let it go." He stood, struck a match, and set the contract alight in the metal tray beside his desk. The flame curled along the edges, turning each page into ash. Lila watched as the smoke rose and vanished. "No more terms," he said. "No more pretending." She nodded. "Only truth." Later that night, they hosted a small gathering at the Cole Foundation headquarters to announce their next chapter. The event was modest compared to the lavish galas of the past. There were no reporters, no flashing cameras, just employees, volunteers, and friends whose lives had been touched by their work. Ethan spoke first. This foundation began as an obligation, he admitted, but it has become our purpose. Everything we lost brought us here, to something real. When he finished, he turned to Lila. I once asked you to be my wife for the sake of appearances, he said softly. Now I ask again for the sake of love. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he reached into his pocket and revealed a simple silver ring, engraved with 2 words, no terms. Lila's eyes filled with tears. You do not need to ask, she whispered. You already have my heart. The room erupted in applause as he slipped the ring onto her finger. In that moment, all the noise of the past faded, the contracts, the lies, the expectations. What remained was quiet, honest love. Later, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, Lila said softly, It feels strange, does it not? To start over where we first broke. Ethan smiled, pulling her close. Maybe that is what miracles really are, not something sudden, but something rebuilt with patience and faith. She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the lights below shimmer like tiny stars. Their story had begun as a transaction, a desperate attempt to save what could not be saved. But it ended here, as something far greater, proof that even the most fragile beginnings can become forever when love is real. 1 year later, the city looked brighter, the sky wider, and the Cole Foundation stood taller than ever before. The scars of the past had faded into quiet proof of resilience. On a warm spring morning, sunlight spilled through the glass atrium of the Foundation's new community hospital, the one Lila had designed herself. It was called Heart and Hope, named after the 2 things that had carried her through every storm. Ethan walked beside her through the busy lobby, where nurses greeted them with smiles and patients waved in gratitude. They said miracles take time, Lila whispered. I think this is ours. Ethan smiled. You delivered it, he said softly. I only built the walls, you gave them a reason to stand. They stopped at a small plaque near the entrance. It read, in honor of second chances and the courage to love again. Lila traced the words with her fingertips, tears welling in her eyes. You kept your promise, she said. Ethan shook his head gently. No, we kept it together. That afternoon, the foundation hosted its anniversary celebration in the courtyard. There were no photographers or red carpets, only the sound of laughter and live music. Volunteers served food, children chased balloons, and the world around them felt real, unpolished, but beautiful. As the sun began to set, Ethan took Lila's hand and led her to the small stage at the center. I never wrote vows for our first wedding, he said, his voice carrying over the gentle hum of the crowd. But I have them now. The crowd quieted as he continued. Lila, you were supposed to be my solution. Instead, you became my reason. You showed me that love is not a contract to be signed, it is a choice we make every day. And today, I choose you again. Lila's tears spilled freely. Then I choose you too, she said. Not because I have to, but because life without you would feel unfinished. The audience erupted in applause as they exchanged a kiss, simple, true, and full of everything they had fought for. Later that night, as the lights dimmed and the courtyard emptied, Ethan and Lila walked through the quiet hallways of the hospital. Through the glass, the city shimmered in reflections of gold. Do you ever think about the beginning? Lila asked. Every day, Ethan replied. But I would not change a thing. Because even if I had known the cost, I would have still hired you and loved you just the same. She laughed softly, resting her head on his shoulder. Outside, the first stars appeared, glimmering faintly over the skyline. The world had not given them a perfect story, but it had given them a real one, built from loss, redemption, and love that no paper could ever define. As they stepped into the night, hand in hand, the wind carried her whisper into the dark. He hired a wife, she said, smiling, but I delivered a miracle. And in that quiet truth, their story found its forever.